The door to the battalion commander's office was a slab of dark, scarred oak, a silent sentinel at the end of a hallway that smelled of old coffee, floor wax, and the faint metallic tang of anxiety. I stood before it, the starch in my new ACU collar digging into my neck, my right hand curled around the smooth wood of my dress cap. My name tape read VANCE. My rank was captain. My branch insignia, the crossed rifles, felt heavier than the metal suggested. 5 years of preparation led to this threshold, and on the other side of it, a voice I didn't yet know was slicing through the wood. "A damned publicity stunt, sir. You know it, I know it. She'll last a month. 2, tops. They'll find a place for her in logistics soon enough." The voice was male, confident, laced with a casual disdain that came from unassailable privilege. I recognized the tone. I'd heard it in the halls of West Point, muttered behind my back after I'd topped the tactics board. I'd heard it from my own extended family, the ones who were Vances. Let her play soldier. Reality will sort her out. The battalion commander's reply was a low, indistinct rumble. Then the other voice again, Captain James Ridley, as I would learn. "It's about the team, sir. The cohesion. You put a woman in a rifle platoon, it changes the dynamic. The men won't follow. Thorns already fit to be tied. It's a distraction we don't need, not with the deployment cycle coming up." My fingers tightened on my cap. The urge to turn the handle to let my entrance be the rebuttal was a physical pressure in my chest. But you don't interrupt a battalion commander. You wait, you listen, you learn. My father, a colonel with a voice like gravel and eyes that miss nothing, had drilled that into me. Pressure is a gift, Evelyn. It shows you the terrain. The terrain here was hostile. 5 years earlier, the terrain had been pristine green felt and the smell of wool and ambition. The auditorium at West Point was a cavern of echoing silence and held breath. I stood at attention, my spine a steel rod, as the general moved down the line. My father was in the audience, a blur of dress blue in the third row. He hadn't wanted this. He de-wanted me in the JAG Corps in intelligence anywhere but here. "The infantry will break you," he'd said, his face grim. "Not because you're not tough, but because they won't let you be." The general stopped before me. He was an old cavalryman, his face a road map of sun and service. He pinned the gold bars of a second lieutenant onto my epaulets, his hands steady. He didn't smile. His eyes, pale blue and assessing, held mine. "Congratulations, Lieutenant Vance, your branch is infantry." A ripple went through the crowd, a susurrus of surprise. It wasn't official policy anymore, but it was still tradition. A wall, I'd requested it. My file with its top marks in leadership, tactics, and physical endurance had been flagged, reviewed, debated in rooms I would never see. The general's gaze was my first test. I met it, my expression giving away nothing. No triumph, no fear, just acceptance. The pressure in my chest was the same as now, outside the oak door, but it was cleaner then. A simple anvil to forge myself against. The low rumble from the office ceased. A chair scraped. I took a half step back, straightened my shoulders, and knocked 3 sharp, crisp raps. "Enter." The office was spacious, dominated by a large map of what I recognized as our upcoming deployment area. The battalion commander, Colonel Greer, was a broad-shouldered man with a close-cropped gray flat top. He remained seated behind his desk, his expression unreadable. Standing before the desk, turning as I entered, was Captain James Ridley. He was handsome in a textbook way, with a strong jaw and the easy posture of a man who expected to be looked at. His eyes, a cool gray, swept over me from my polished boots to my face and dismissed me in a single, calculated glance. He offered a thin, humorless smile. "Ah, the new blood, sir. I'll let you get to it." He nodded to Colonel Greer and moved past me. He didn't brush my shoulder, but he came close enough that I caught the scent of his aftershave, something expensive and sharp. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving a vacuum in the room. "Captain Vance, reporting as ordered, sir." Colonel Greer studied me for a long moment. "At ease." I shifted my stance, clasping my hands behind my back. "Your file is impressive. West Point, top of your class in tactics. Ranger School, airborne, air assault, a veritable checklist of badges." "Thank you, sir." "Don't," he said, his voice flat. "The file is what got you in the door. This," he gestured vaguely at the room, "the battalion beyond, is what matters. You are taking command of 2nd Platoon, Alpha Company. Your platoon sergeant is Sergeant First Class Marcus Thorne. He has 20 years in the infantry. He's forgotten more about soldiering than you've learned. You will listen to him. Yes, sir. Your company commander is Captain Ridley, whom you just met. He's a fine officer, comes from a long line of them. He let that hang. You are the first female infantry officer in this division, Captain. That is a fact. I don't care about it. What I care about is whether you can lead 40 men in combat, whether you can keep them alive and accomplish the mission. Sergeant Thorne cares about that. Your soldiers will care about that. Do you understand? Perfectly, sir. Good. Major Chen, my executive officer, will get you squared away with admin. Dismissed. I saluted, executed a perfect about-face, and left. The hallway was empty. Ridley was gone. The words logistics soon enough seemed etched into the linoleum floor. Major David Chen's office was smaller, neater. He stood as I entered, a man of average height with a calm, intelligent face. Captain Vance, David Chen? He offered a hand, his grip firm and brief. Welcome to the 1/8. Here's your platoon roster, the training schedule for the next quarter, and the leave packet you'll need to sign. Ignore Colonel Greer's bedside manner. He's a results man. Ridley is ambitious. Thorne is the key. He's a traditionalist, but he's pragmatic. Prove you're competent and he'll back you. Prove you're not and you're finished. I took the folders. And you, sir? A faint smile touched his lips. I'm a talent scout. The Army needs good leaders. I operate on the theory that talent can come from anywhere. Don't make me regret that theory. He nodded toward the door. Your platoon is assembling in Bay 4. Don't keep them waiting. Bay 4 was a cavernous space smelling of diesel, rubber, and male sweat. 40 soldiers stood in loose ranks, their faces a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and outright hostility. They were in PT gear, having just returned from a run. At the front, arms crossed over a chest that seemed carved from the same oak as the commander's door, stood Sergeant First Class Marcus Thorne. He was in his early 40s, his hair shaved to a shadow, his face a landscape of stern angles and a neatly trimmed mustache. His eyes, the color of flint, locked onto me as I walked in. The room fell silent. I stopped before the formation, dropping my ruck and helmet bag at my feet. Good morning, I'm Captain Evelyn Vance, your new platoon leader. No one spoke. A few glances were exchanged. One young soldier, a woman with a pale, serious face and dark hair pulled into a tight bun under her patrol cap, watched me with an intensity that bordered on anxiety. Private First Class Anya Petrova, the only other female in the formation. Her name tape was new, her uniform crisp. A rookie, like me, but in a much more vulnerable way. Thorne unfolded his arms. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone. Platoon, a 10 hut? The soldiers snapped to attention with a unified crack of heels. Sir, this is 2nd Platoon. We're currently at 95% strength, awaiting one transfer from SIL. We've completed the battalion baseline PT assessment. Average score was 280. We have 2 expert infantry badge holders, 3 in the platoon. The men are ready to train. He said the men. He didn't look at Petrova. I didn't correct him. Not here. Thank you, Sergeant Thorne. Platoon at ease. They shifted stance. I won't waste your time with a long speech. You have a reputation as one of the best platoons in the battalion. I intend to keep it that way. My job is to lead you, to train you, and to bring you all home. Your job is to be the best soldiers you can be. We'll start with a terrain walk this afternoon. Sergeant Thorne, a moment. The soldiers were dismissed, drifting off in small groups, their murmurs a low buzz. Petrova lingered for a second, her eyes meeting mine before she quickly turned and followed a group of specialists. Thorne remained, his expression impassive. Sergeant, I want your candid assessment of the platoon's readiness. Strengths, weaknesses, key leaders. He looked at me, really looked for the first time. Strengths, they can shoot, they can move, they know their drills. Weaknesses, they're complacent. They've had 3 lieutenants in 18 months. One was a fool, one got transferred, one broke his leg in a skiing accident. They're waiting for you to be number 4. He paused. Key leaders, squad leaders are solid. Your weapons squad leader, Sergeant Daly, thinks he should have my job. He's not wrong, but he's impatient. The rest, they'll follow me. Whether they follow you is up to you, Captain. It was brutally honest. Understood. The terrain walk at 1400, full kit, will run through the squad attack lanes. A flicker of something, surprise, in his flinty eyes. He'd expected me to ask for a meeting to look at slides, not to go straight to the dirt. Full kit. Yes, ma'am. The afternoon sun was a hammer on the back of my neck. The terrain walk was 6 miles of rolling Georgia hills, scrub pine, and red clay. I moved with the platoon, not ahead of it, listening as Thorne and the squad leaders pointed out rally points, avenues of approach, fields of fire. I asked questions, specific tactical questions about interlocking sectors, about the maximum engagement range for the M240, about contingency plans if the left flank collapsed. The soldiers began to listen, their initial skepticism giving way to guarded attention. I saw Petrova struggling under the weight of her pack, her smaller frame laboring on the steepest incline, but she didn't fall out. She just kept putting one boot in front of the other, her jaw set. The following days were a blur of administration, equipment inventories, and more training. The hostility wasn't overt, but it was a constant low hum. Ridley would drop by the platoon area with a comment about how the barracks needed to be cleaner or how our motor pool line was a disgrace, criticisms he never leveled at the other platoons. I just nodded and ensured the standards were met, often staying late with the duty detail, my hands as dirty as theirs. The real test came on Friday. Battalion had scheduled a forced march, 12 miles with full combat load, to be completed in under 3 hours. It was a gut check, a tradition. The morning was cool and misty when we stepped off. For the first 8 miles, the platoon moved well, a column of determined ghosts in the dawn light. Then we hit the long, soul-crushing incline known as Cardiac Ridge. The pace began to tell. Soldiers started to lag. I dropped back from my position at the head of the column, moving down the line, offering a word here, checking a water source there. I found Petrova near the back. She was pale, sweat pouring down her face, her breathing ragged. Every step was a visible struggle. A specialist next to her muttered, "Just fall out, Petrova. You're gonna kill yourself." She shook her head, a stubborn, desperate motion. Her eyes were glazed with fatigue. Without a word, I slipped in beside her. I unclipped her ruck from her shoulders, the weight staggering as it transferred to my front. I clipped it over my own pack, the combined load making my knees buckle for a second before I locked them. I said nothing. I just adjusted the straps and kept walking, now carrying 2 full combat loads. Petrova stared at me, her mouth slightly open. She took a deep, shuddering breath and fell in behind me, her step noticeably lighter. The last 2 miles were a study in pure agony. The extra 90 pounds was a living thing, trying to drive me into the clay. My shoulders burned. My hips ached. My vision tunneled to the boots of the soldier in front of me. The only sound was my own heartbeat and the rhythmic crunch of gravel. I didn't look back. I just marched. We crossed the finish line at the motor pool as the clock ticked over to 2 hours and 55 minutes. The platoon collapsed in a heaving, sweating mass. I carefully lowered the 2 rucks to the ground, my muscles trembling with the release. I took a long pull from my canteen, the water tasting like dust and copper. Sergeant Thorne walked up. He hadn't fallen out, he'd been near the front, setting the pace. His own face was sheened with sweat, but he breathed evenly. He looked at the 2 rucks at my feet, then at Petrova, who was sitting on the curb, head between her knees, breathing deeply but steadily. He looked back at me. His flinty eyes gave nothing away. Then he turned and walked to his Humvee. He returned a moment later, holding 2 steaming cardboard cups from the DFAC. He handed one to me. It was black coffee, strong and bitter. Our fingers brushed during the exchange. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. No smile, no good job, no words at all. But as I took the cup, the heat seeping into my sore hands, I saw Ridley across the motor pool, watching. His expression was unreadable, but the easy confidence was gone, replaced by a sharp, calculating focus. He hadn't expected me to finish, let alone carry a soldier's load. Thorne took a sip of his coffee, his gaze scanning our exhausted platoon. "Get M hydrated and stretched out, Captain. We've got live fire tomorrow." "Yes, Sergeant." He walked away, leaving me standing there with the warm cup, the taste of coffee and earned, silent respect on my tongue. The ground beneath my boots was still hostile terrain, but I had just taken my first, small piece of it. 6 months in, and the weight of the rucksack had become a comfort. Not the literal one, though I'd grown accustomed to that too. The 60 pounds of gear, water, and ammunition that turned every movement into a deliberate, grunting physics problem. No, the weight I meant was the command. The platoon, 32 souls whose lives, for this stretch of time and space, were my direct responsibility. It was a pressure that lived in the bones, a constant, low-grade hum beneath every thought. My father called it the burden. He was right about that part. What he was wrong about was me being crushed by it. I converted it daily into focus. Into checking Private Henderson's boot laces one more time before a road march, into memorizing the terrain models for our sector until I could walk them blindfolded. The field exercise was the crucible. 2 weeks in the Pine Barrens, the air thick with humidity and the smell of diesel and damp earth. The scenario was a battalion-sized force-on-force, a sprawling, chaotic game of capture the flag with laser tag gear and umpires scribbling in notebooks. My platoon was tasked with securing a key intersection, a dirt road junction designated Objective Granite, to enable the battalion's main assault. Ridley's platoon had the flank, tasked with a supporting attack. The plan was mine. A night infiltration, moving cross-country over 3 clicks of thick, brambled woodland to avoid the enemy patrols we knew were watching the trails. It was risky. In the dark, with a full combat load, it was easy for a platoon to get strung out, lost, or simply arrive too exhausted to fight. Thorne had listened to my brief in our makeshift tent CP, his face a mask of weathered stone. He'd grunted, which from him was as good as a standing ovation. "Lot of canebrakes out there," he'd said finally, tapping the map. "Gonna sound like a herd of cattle if we're not careful. We'll move slow. Security halts every 100 meters. You take point with the first squad, I'll be in the center with 2, Sergeant Hayes brings up the rear with 3. We'll duct tape every loose piece of kit tonight." He'd given a curt nod. "Ridley's gonna take the main trail. He'll be there in 40 minutes, laughing at us while we're still picking thorns out of our asses." "Let him," ID said, folding the map. "The trail is the obvious approach. It'll be the kill zone." The night of the infiltration was moonless, the kind of dark that feels like a physical substance. We moved like ghosts, or at least like very careful, heavily burdened ghosts. Every rustle of a bush, every snapped twig, sounded like a gunshot in the stillness. I watched the faint glow-in-the-dark tape on Thorne's helmet ahead of me, a tiny, bobbing star in the void. My world shrank to the sound of my own breathing, the weight on my shoulders, and the need to feel the presence of the soldier behind me, Private Petrova. She was my radio operator now. I'd picked her after the first month. She was quiet, never complained, and had a preternatural sense of direction. More importantly, she listened. She absorbed every order, every correction, not with nervous energy, but with a calm, analytical focus that reminded me of myself at that age, albeit with less simmering rage. She was my shadow, the hum of the PRC 119 on her back a constant reminder of our link to the wider world. It took us 4 hours. We emerged from the tree line behind Objective Granite exactly on schedule, our bodies slick with sweat and crisscrossed with scratches. Ridley's platoon, as predicted, had been ambushed and decimated on the trail 2 hours earlier. We set up in a tight perimeter, dug in, and waited. When the simulated enemy counterattack came at dawn, we were ready, fresh, and perfectly positioned. We wiped them out. The umpire, a major from the brigade staff, walked through our position afterwards, a rare smile on his face. "Textbook, Captain Vance, absolutely textbook. Where'd you learn that infiltration route?" "Map study, sir," I said, my voice hoarse from whispering commands all night. I could feel the eyes of my platoon on me, could see the grins they were trying to hide behind their canteens. Thorne was checking ammo counts, his own expression unreadable, but he stood a little straighter. The battalion commander, Colonel Greer, made a point of visiting our position later that morning. Ridley was trailing behind him, his face a thundercloud. "Outstanding work, Vance," Greer boomed, shaking my hand. He was an old-school armor officer who valued results above all else. "You made the rest of the battalion look like they were moving in slow motion. This is the kind of tactical aggression we need." He glanced at Ridley. "Take notes, Jim." The look Ridley gave me as the colonel moved off was pure, undiluted venom. I met it with a neutral stare, the one I'd perfected at West Point. The one that said, "I see you, and you are not a threat to my focus." He turned on his heel and stalked away. The praise was a double-edged sword. In the chow line that evening, the rumor reached me. It came via Petrova, who had heard it from a buddy in supply, who had heard it from Ridley's platoon sergeant. The story was that my flawless performance was no accident. That Major Chen, the battalion XO, had fed me the enemy positions. That my entire success was a staged show to prove a point, a diversity win orchestrated from above. The heat of the day fled from my body, replaced by a cold, hard knot in my stomach. I kept spooning the lukewarm beef stew into my mouth, the taste turning to ash. Preferential treatment. The oldest, cheapest shot in the book. It was designed to be unfalsifiable, to poison the well of any accomplishment. I saw Thorne watching me from across the mess tent, his eyes narrowed. He'd heard it too. A few days after we returned to garrison, the field exercise officially deemed a major success for the company, I caught Thorne in the motor pool after final formation. He was doing a late-night check on one of the Humvees, his hands black with grease. The bay was cavernous, smelling of oil and concrete dust, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry insects. "Sergeant Thorne, a word." He didn't look up from the engine block. "Sir, I need your assessment, not the one for my OER, the real one, of me, of my leadership right now." He straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a rag that was already more grease than cloth. He studied me, his gaze flat and appraising. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant clang of a tool from another bay. "You're competent, Captain," he said finally, his voice a low rumble in the empty space. "More than, you plan like a chess master. You don't waste words. You carry your own weight and then some. The soldiers see that. They respect it." I waited. There was always a but with Thorne. He tossed the rag onto the fender. "But competence isn't the same as belonging. That's a heavier ruck to carry. You can know every drill, win every exercise, and still be on the outside looking in. That's just the terrain." He paused, picking his words with the care of a man laying out explosives. "Ridley's little story, it's bullshit. Anyone with 2 brain cells knows it's bullshit. But it sticks because some of them want it to be true. It's easier than admitting a woman straight out of the academy can outthink and outmarch them. Your problem ain't your tactics, Captain. It's their mythology." The cold knot tightened. He just articulated the silent, formless dread I'd been carrying since I'd first pinned on the crossed rifles. "So what's the solution, Sergeant? How do I carry that ruck?" A ghost of something, not a smile, but an acknowledgement, passed over his face. "You already are, you just keep walking, you lead them. The 32, you get them home alive when things get real. The rest of it," he shrugged, a massive shift of his shoulders. "The rest is noise, but it's loud noise, don't ever think it ain't." It was the longest speech I'd ever heard him give, and in his own gruff way, it was a pledge of allegiance. He wasn't telling me I belonged to the old guard. He was telling me he belonged to the platoon, and I was its commander. It was the only loyalty that mattered. "Thank you, Sergeant." He gave a single nod and turned back to the engine. "We're low on transmission fluid. I'll put in a wreck." The following week, the alert order came down. Not an exercise. The real thing. The battalion was deploying. The news hit the company area with a physical force, a sudden vacuum that sucked away all the petty gossip and garrison nonsense, replacing it with a sharp, metallic taste of anticipation and fear. Training shifted overnight. The stakes were no longer points on an umpire's scorecard. Live fire ranges became religious ceremonies. Every malfunction drill, every casualty evacuation procedure was practiced with a grim, silent intensity. The weight of the rucksack multiplied. Major Chen summoned me to his office. It was spare, functional, the walls covered in maps and readiness charts. He didn't offer pleasantries. "Sit, Captain, you've seen the warning order." "Yes, sir." "Your company commander is putting you in for a Bronze Star for your actions on the FTX. Ridley is contesting it, calling it inflated. Says it was a training exercise." I kept my face still. "I was just doing my job, sir." "I know you were," he said, steepling his fingers. "That's not why I called you in here. The commendation will likely go through, but that's not the point. The point is you have a target on your back now bigger than ever. Ridley and his cohort are scared. A successful female combat arms officer isn't a novelty to them anymore, it's a precedent, and they hate precedents that disrupt their worldview." "Sergeant Thorne advised me it's just noise, sir." Chen's lips quirked. "Thorne is a wise man, but he's a tactical genius. This," he gestured between us, "is operational, strategic. The noise has effects. It can limit your next assignment, sour a key relationship at a critical moment. I'm telling you this not to worry you, but to arm you. You cannot just be better than them. You have to be so obviously, undeniably superior that their whispers look like the pathetic squeaks they are. This deployment is your chance to do that. In blood, if necessary." Not your own, he added sharply. The blood of your decisions, the lives of your men, your performance in combat will be the only argument that permanently matters. Everything else is just talk. It was a colder, harder calculus than Thorne's. Chen was playing the long game on a board that included stars for his own shoulders and the future shape of the force. I was a piece on that board, but a valued one. He was investing. I understand, sir. Good, now your platoon's pre-deployment training schedule. I want you to focus on urban operations. The intelligence summaries suggest that's where we're headed. I've arranged for additional range time at the shoot house. Use it. It was preferential treatment, of the most practical kind. I couldn't refuse it, not with lives on the line. The irony was not lost on me. Thank you, sir. The final briefing was held in the battalion auditorium. The entire battalion, all 800 of us, packed into the fixed seats, the air thick with the smell of starched uniforms, sweat, and anxiety. The commander and the command sergeant major laid out the timeline, wheels up in 3 weeks. The area of operations, a region whose name I'd only seen in classified briefings, a patchwork of ancient cities and desolate hills. The mission, stability and counterinsurgency. The threat, improvised explosives, sniper fire, complex ambushes. The reality of it, the sheer mundane bureaucracy of impending violence that will be issued, the rules of engagement, the casualty notification procedures, landed on my chest like a block of stone. I saw the same realization dawning on the faces around me. The young ones, like Petrova, looked pale, their eyes wide as they tried to absorb it all. The older NCOs, like Thorne, wore expressions of grim resignation, their jaws set. This was what the 20 years had been for. After the briefing, as the company filed out into the blinding afternoon sun, buzzing with fragmented conversations, Petrova fell into step beside me. She waited until we were away from the main crowd, near the quiet side of the barracks. "Ma'am," her voice was small, a stark contrast to the usual calm precision she carried. "What is it, Petrova?" She swallowed, her eyes fixed on a crack in the sidewalk. "I'm scared, Captain." The admission, so blunt and honest, hit me harder than any of Chen's strategic advice or Ridley's venom. She was 19. She'd joined for college money, for a way out of a dying mill town. She was a brilliant soldier, but she was still a kid. My kid now. I stopped walking. She stopped beside me, finally looking up, her face open and vulnerable. This was the weight, not the rumors, not the politics. This. I didn't offer empty platitudes. I didn't tell her not to be scared. That would have been an insult. "I am too," I said, my voice low. It was the truth. The fear was a live wire in my gut, constant and humming. It's the right thing to be. It means you understand the stakes. She nodded, chewing her lip. What if I freeze, out there, when it matters? I thought of my father's voice, not the disapproving one, but the one from long ago, teaching me to shoot on a dusty range. Pressure is a gift. It shows you the shape of things. I modified it for her. "The training is in your bones, Anya," I said, using her first name for the first time. "You won't freeze, you'll react. You'll do what we've practiced 1,000 times, and I will be there. Thorne will be there, the whole platoon will be there. We carry it together. That's how this works." She took a deep, shuddering breath, and some of the tightness around her eyes eased. It wasn't gone, but it was shared. "Okay, Captain, okay. Go pack your gear, double-check your medic's bag, focus on the next task." "Yes, ma'am." She offered a tentative, grateful nod and moved off toward the barracks, her step a little firmer. I stood alone in the slanting light, the sounds of the preparing battalion swirling around me. Thorne's words echoed, a heavier ruck. Chen's words, colder, strategic, and now this, the simple, terrifying trust in a young soldier's eyes. I had earned tactical respect. I had earned a formidable enemy and a powerful mentor. I had earned the loyalty of a gruff old sergeant and a scared young private. The deployment loomed, a dark horizon line. The noise would continue, but it was fading into the background, replaced by the deafening, immediate demands of the real mission. The weight was immense. But as I turned toward my office to begin the endless lists, the countless checks, I felt my spine straighten under it. It was my weight to carry. I would convert it, step by step, into the only thing that mattered, bringing them all home. The heat was the first thing I noticed that morning, a thick woolen blanket that settled over the valley before the sun even cleared the eastern ridge. 3 months in country, and my body still hadn't reconciled itself to the weight of it. It was a different heat than the training grounds back home, drier, dustier, carrying the faint, metallic scent of the arid soil and something else, something old and tense that had nothing to do with the weather. My company was strung out along a worn cart track that served as the main supply route for a cluster of villages the battalion was trying to secure. The mission was straightforward on paper, a joint clearance operation with Ridley's Charlie Company on our northern flank. We were to sweep through the valley, clear any insurgent activity, and establish a temporary combat outpost at the northern end designated Checkpoint Viper. Ridley had the shorter, more direct route along the high ground. My company, Bravo, had the valley floor and the maze of irrigation canals and mud brick compounds that dotted it. I walked just behind my lead platoon, Sergeant Thorne a silent, solid presence at my left shoulder. The radio handset was pressed to my ear, the constant, low crackle of the battalion net a backdrop to my thoughts. Ridley's voice came through, too loud, too confident. Bravo 6, this is Charlie 6. My lead element is at phase line blue. No contact. We're proceeding to secure the high ground overlooking your objective. Suggest you pick up the pace, Bravo. This valley's a shooting gallery. I keyed the handset, my voice flat. Charlie 6, Bravo 6. Roger, we're methodical by design. Out. Thorne grunted beside me, not looking at me. Methodical, that's one word for it. He wants the glory of being first to Viper, I said, lowering the handset. Let him have it. I want the ground properly cleared. He's not clearing, Thorne said, his eyes scanning the tree line ahead. He's racing. That high ground he's so proud of, there's a wadi that cuts right across it, deep enough to hide a technical. He's not sending a security element to scout it. I heard his platoon leaders arguing with him on the company net before we stepped off. I felt a familiar knot tighten in my gut, arrogance born of insecurity. It was a dangerous combination in a combat zone. I'd studied Ridley's file as intently as I'd studied the terrain maps. He was a checklist commander, aggressive in movement, lax in security. He viewed caution as weakness, especially from me. We moved another kilometer. The sun was fully up now, hammering the pale earth into a blinding glare. My point man, Private First Class Anya Petrova, held up a closed fist from her position at the corner of a crumbling compound wall. The column froze. I moved forward, Thorne shadowing me. Petrova didn't look at me, her eyes fixed on the narrow alley ahead. Captain, the canal ahead, the bridge is out, looks recently collapsed. I edged to the corner, peering around the baked mud. She was right. The stone arch of a small bridge over an irrigation canal had given way, the rubble looking too fresh in the settled dust. It could have been erosion. It could have been something else. Thorne, I said, my voice low. Get 2nd platoon to flank left through that orchard. 1st platoon, hold here. Tell 3rd to bring the 60mm up to that berm. I don't like this. He was already moving, his voice a low growl into his own handset. The company shifted with a practiced, quiet efficiency, the squads peeling off to establish overlapping fields of fire. The heavy weapons team scrambled into position. My radio operator tapped my shoulder, his face grim. He passed me the handset. Bravo 6, Charlie 6, we've secured the high ground. I have eyes on Checkpoint Viper. It's clear, we're moving to occupy. You're still a click south. What's your delay? I took the handset, my eyes still scanning the canal, the collapsed bridge, the unnatural stillness of the surrounding fields. Charlie 6, Bravo 6, we have a possible obstacle. Conducting a bypass. Maintain your security posture. That wadi on your approach. Is fine, Bravo 6. My scouts checked it. You worry about your valley, I'll worry about my ridge. Charlie 6 out. The click of the handset was louder than a gunshot in the sudden, heavy silence. No birds. I realized it a second too late. The absence of sound was more telling than any noise. The ambush detonated from the north, from Ridley's position. It wasn't a single explosion. It was a coordinated cascade, first the deep thump of a buried IED, then the immediate, vicious rattle of multiple machine guns opening up from concealed fighting positions in the wadi he'd dismissed. The distinct, higher-pitched snap of sniper fire mixed in. Ridley's transmission was a burst of panicked, fragmented shouting that painted a picture of pure chaos. Contact, contact, we're pinned there in the wadi. They're everywhere, we can't. The sound cut off in a burst of static. My mind didn't race. It did the opposite. It narrowed, focused, clicking through tactical options with a cold, mechanical clarity born of 1,000 simulations and a handful of real, tense moments on previous patrols. The map in my head updated. Ridley had rushed to occupy Viper. He'd taken the high ground without securing the wadi that dominated it. He was now trapped on that high ground, exposed, taking fire from at least 3 directions. And my company was in the valley directly below his position, advancing toward that same checkpoint. I keyed the handset, my voice cutting through the rising chatter on the company net. All Bravo elements, this is Bravo 6. Contact to our north. Charlie Company is pinned. 1st platoon, hold your position. 2nd platoon, flank right, establish a support by fire position along that ditch line. 3rd platoon, you are my reserve. Heavy weapons, I want suppressive fire on that northern tree line, 50 meters east of the last known enemy position. Do not fire into the high ground. You will hit Charlie elements, fire. I wasn't giving orders to my platoon leaders. They were already reacting, their own voices calm and clear on their platoon nets, moving their squads. I was giving orders to the battalion net, to the fire support team that was orbiting somewhere above us in a bird that suddenly felt very far away. Redbird, this is Bravo 6, troops in contact. Grid, I rattled off the 8-digit grid based on the last visual reference I had from Ridley's frantic transmission and my own mental plot of our relative position. Request immediate suppression on enemy location. Danger close. Adjust fire. Over. The response was blessedly professional, the voice of the Air Force Joint Terminal Attack Controller comm. Bravo 6, Redbird, Roger, adjusting, shot over. We weren't the target. Not yet. The ambush on Ridley was the opening act. The main event was designed to catch us in the open as we moved to support him, funneled into the same kill zone. I could see it unfolding. They'd let Ridley's lead element pass, then triggered the IEDs to cut off his follow-on elements. Now they were using the high ground he'd so carelessly occupied to rain fire down on him, while their secondary elements would be maneuvering to hit us from the flanks, using the canal and the compounds as cover. Thorn, I said, my eyes scanning our immediate area. That orchard, can we use it? It's a funnel, Captain, he said, his own eyes assessing the same ground. They'll have shooters in the tree line covering it. He was right. We needed to move, but we needed to move smart. We couldn't go back the way we'd come. We couldn't push straight toward the gunfire. We had to find a third option. 2nd platoon, I called over the radio. You see that low wall running west from the canal? Use it as cover. Move to that compound at grid. I gave them the coordinates. 1st platoon, provide covering fire. 3rd platoon, be prepared to assault through the orchard if we can clear it. Heavy weapons, keep that suppressive fire on the tree line. Redbird, adjust fire 50 meters south of initial target. They're trying to push us north into the open. Don't let them. The world dissolved into a series of sharp, sensory details. The cough of dust kicked up by near impacts. The acrid, eye-watering sting of cordite. The deafening roar of my own weapon firing, the brass cartridges arcing through the air in slow motion. The radio was a constant, buzzing presence against my ear, voices layered over one another. Bravo 6, this is 2-1. We're taking fire from the compound at our 2 o'clock. 1st platoon, this is 1-6. We're pinned down. We need that 60 mic too. Redbird, this is Bravo 6. Adjust fire. My grid is now. A bullet struck the mud wall beside my head, sending a spray of grit across my cheek. I didn't flinch. I felt the warm trickle of blood from a piece of stone that had nicked my temple. I swiped at it with the back of my hand, my fingers coming away smeared with red and dirt. I kept talking, kept directing. Medevac, I need a medevac at my location. 2 casualties, 1 critical. A soldier went down to my right, clutching his leg. Another dragged him behind the low wall. The medic was already there, his hands moving with a frantic, practiced efficiency. I didn't look away from the canal ahead, from the movement I saw in the shadows of the far bank. They were trying to flank us. 3rd platoon, watch your left. Enemy in the canal, 9 o'clock. The roar of a heavy machine gun joined the cacophony, its distinct thump-thump-thump a bass note to the higher-pitched rattle of the AKs. They had a PKM in the fight. That changed the calculus. We needed to break contact, but we couldn't just run. We had to break their momentum. Redbird, this is Bravo 6. I need Willie Pete on my position. Now, danger close, adjust. The JTAC's voice cut in, sharper now. Bravo 6, Redbird. Confirm you are requesting white phosphorus on your own position. Say again. Affirmative, Willie Pete on my grid. They're in the canal, they're trying to flank us. Do it now. The world went white, then orange. The heat was a physical wave that washed over us, the concussion a solid wall of air that knocked the breath from my lungs. The ground shook, and for a moment, the enemy fire slackened, stunned by the sudden, horrific inferno that had erupted in their midst. Move now, all Bravo elements break contact. Move to the compound, go. The company surged forward, a single organism driven by the raw, animal instinct to survive. We poured fire into the canal as we ran, our boots churning the soft earth. We reached the relative safety of the compound walls, collapsing into the dust, our chests heaving. The radio crackled again. It was Ridley, his voice now a strained, desperate whisper. Bravo 6, we're cut off. I've lost my command post. They're everywhere. I took the handset again, my voice still calm, still clear. Charlie 6, Bravo 6, I am moving to your position. What is your situation? How many effectives do you have? A long pause, filled with the sound of gunfire and screaming in the background. I don't know, they're all over us. We're holding, but just barely. I need fire support. Now. I looked at Thorn. His face was granite, his eyes reflecting the orange glow of the still-burning phosphorus. He gave me a single, sharp nod. He trusted me to make the call. Redbird, this is Bravo 6. Adjust fire. New target. Grid. I gave them the coordinates, not of Ridley's position, but of the canal where the enemy was concentrated, where they were trying to push us. Fire for effect. All Bravo elements prepare to assault. We're going to extract Charlie Company. The assault was a blur of controlled violence. We moved in two bounding elements, one providing covering fire while the other advanced. We cleared the canal, the bodies of the enemy fighters floating in the now muddy water. We pushed through the orchard, the trees providing scant cover from the sporadic sniper fire that still pinged around us. We found Ridley's command element huddled behind a low stone wall, their faces pale and smeared with dirt and blood. Ridley himself was crouched behind his radio operator, his eyes wide and unfocused. He looked up as I approached, his uniform torn and stained. Vance, he croaked, his voice hoarse. What are you doing here? Extracting you, Captain, I said, my voice flat. I didn't look at the bodies of his fallen soldiers that lay nearby. I kept my eyes on his. We need to move. Now, can your men move? He stared at me, his mind struggling to process the question. Some of them, the wounded. We'll carry them, I said, turning to Thorn. Sergeant, get a head count. I want every Charlie element accounted for and ready to move in 2 minutes. Thorn was already moving, his voice a low, steady rumble as he organized the extraction. I turned back to Ridley, my hand extended. Give me your handset. He blinked, then fumbled for the handset, his fingers slick with sweat. I took it, my voice cutting through the noise on the battalion net. All stations, this is Bravo 6. We have made contact with Charlie Company. We are extracting them now. I need a medevac at my location. I have multiple casualties. I need fire support on the following grid. The coordinates I gave were not for our position, but for the wadi where the enemy was concentrated, where they were trying to push us. The artillery response was swift, the shells screaming in from the distance and impacting with a series of earth-shaking concussions that silenced the enemy machine guns for a precious few moments. Move now, go. We ran, half carrying, half dragging the wounded Charlie Company soldiers with us. We fell back to a more defensible position, a larger, more fortified compound that had been designated as our fallback point. We collapsed inside the walls, the adrenaline draining away to leave us shaking, exhausted, and covered in a fine layer of dust and sweat and blood. I leaned against the wall, my head swimming. The cut on my temple had stopped bleeding, but the dried blood itched. I ignored it. I took a long drink from my canteen, the warm, metallic-tasting water doing little to soothe the raw ache in my throat. I looked around at my soldiers. Their faces were grim, smeared with dirt and sweat, but their eyes were clear. They were alive. We were all alive. Thorn appeared beside me, his own face a mask of grime. He held out a fresh handset. The Major wants to talk to you. I took it, pressing it to my ear. Bravo 6, this is Bravo 6. Captain Vance, Major Chen's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it I hadn't heard before. Sitrep. I gave him the situation report, concise and factual. Casualties: 2 dead, 5 wounded, 1 critical. Enemy positions, estimated strength of a platoon plus, dug in along the wadi. We had broken their initial momentum, but they were still out there. We had extracted Charlie Company, but they were in bad shape. Ridley had lost his command post, his communications equipment, and nearly a third of his men in the opening minutes of the ambush. A long silence on the other end of the line. Then, I see, and Ridley. He's shaken, sir, I said, my eyes meeting Thorn S. across the courtyard. He gave me a single, sharp nod. He had heard the same reports I had. His company is combat ineffective. He's requesting immediate extraction. Another pause. Granted, I'm sending a relief force to your position. They should be there within the hour. In the meantime, I need you to do something for me, Captain. Sir, I need you to write a statement. For the record, I need you to tell me exactly what happened out there. I closed my eyes for a moment, the image of the collapsed bridge, the unnatural stillness, the sudden, violent eruption of fire flashing behind my eyelids. Yes, sir. The relief force arrived not in an hour, but in 2, a column of heavily armored vehicles that looked out of place in the dusty compound. I stood with Thorn, watching as the wounded were loaded onto the trucks, the dead carried away with a solemn, respectful silence. Ridley found me as I was finishing my debrief with the senior medic. He was still covered in mud and grime, his uniform torn, but he had washed his face, and his eyes held a new, feverish intensity. He was no longer panicked. He was defensive. Captain Vance, he said, his voice too loud in the quiet of the courtyard. I need to speak with you, now. I turned to face him, my own voice flat. What about Captain? This debacle, he said, his hands gesturing wildly. This was a complete failure of communication. My scouts reported that Wadi was clear. Your company was supposed to be providing flank security. Where were you? I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. I looked past him, to where Thorn was standing, his arms crossed over his broad chest. His face was a mask of stone, but his eyes were chips of flint. Sir, Thorn's voice cut through the air, cold and sharp as a bayonet. With respect, the captain's actions are the only reason your casualty count isn't triple. The map grid she called in saved your flank. Ridley's head snapped around, his eyes wide with shock and fury. He opened his mouth to retort, but Thorn wasn't finished. Multiple soldiers from both companies witnessed it, he continued, his voice carrying across the courtyard, where dozens of mud-covered, exhausted men and women had stopped to listen. They heard her on the radio, directing fire, calling for medevac, adjusting our position while you were still trying to figure out which way was up. They saw her take a round through her shoulder and keep giving orders until every one of her soldiers was accounted for. So before you start shifting blame, you might want to consider that. The silence that followed was absolute. Ridley stared at Thorn, his face flushing a deep, mottled red. He looked at me, his eyes searching for some sign of weakness, some crack in my armor. He found none. He turned on his heel and stalked away, his boots crunching in the gravel. I looked at Thorn. He gave me a single, sharp nod, then turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the center of the courtyard, surrounded by the silent, watching eyes of my soldiers. I didn't move, I didn't look away. I held their gaze, one by one, until the last of them had looked away, and I was left standing alone in the dust and the fading light. Lieutenant Colonel Chen's command tent was a different world from the mud and blood of the compound. It was clean, organized, and smelled of coffee and damp canvas. Chen himself looked older, the lines on his face deeper, but his eyes were the same, sharp, calculating, and kind. He didn't offer me a seat. He stood behind his field desk, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes studying me as I stood at attention before him. At ease, Captain, he said, his voice quiet. Sit. I sat, my back straight, my hands resting on my knees. I waited. He didn't speak for a long moment. He just looked at me, his eyes taking in the dried blood on my temple, the dirt and grime on my uniform, the weariness that I knew was etched into my bones. I've read your report, he said finally, his voice still quiet. And I've read the statements from Sergeant Thorne, from your platoon leaders, from the soldiers who were there. I've also read the after-action report from the fire support team and the transcripts from the battalion net. He paused, his eyes still on mine. Do you know what they all say? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. They all say the same thing, he continued, his voice dropping even lower. They say that you saved lives out there today. They say that you displayed exceptional combat leadership under fire. They say that you made quick, decisive calls that prevented a bad situation from becoming a catastrophe. He leaned forward, his hands resting on the desk. They also say that Captain Ridley failed to secure a key position due to an arrogant oversight, and that his failure put your company in jeopardy. I didn't move, I didn't blink. I've also received a recommendation, he said, his voice now barely a whisper. From the battalion command sergeant major, from the senior NCOs of both companies, and from the brigade commander himself. They have recommended that, due to the battalion commander's injury during the ambush, and based on your performance and their unanimous support, you be placed in temporary command of the battalion. The world didn't stop. It didn't tilt on its axis. It just narrowed until there was nothing left but the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears and the quiet, steady voice of the man sitting across from me. It would be a historic first, he said, his eyes never leaving mine. And it would be temporary, but it would be yours. Do you understand what I'm saying to you, Captain? I understood perfectly. I nodded once, sharp and clean. Good, he said, leaning back in his chair. Then get cleaned up. You have a battalion to command. The knot in my gut was back, a familiar and unwelcome visitor. It wasn't the sharp, coiling dread of an ambush unfolding in real time. This was a slower, deeper pressure, a tectonic shift of responsibility settling into the bedrock of my bones. In 3 hours, I would no longer be Captain Vance. I would be Major Vance, and I would command this battalion. My office was empty, the walls bare save for the ghostly rectangles where my predecessors' plaques and photos had hung. My own gear, a single, framed photo of my first platoon, dog-eared field manuals, a coffee mug from the NCO Academy, sat in a cardboard box by the door. I ran a hand over the dark, polished wood of the desk. It felt like a casket lid. Command was a promise written in other men's blood, a ledger of lives you were tasked to spend wisely. I'd spent the last year learning that math, and it never got easier. The deployment had ended not with a bang, but with a long, weary exhalation. After the Valley, after Ridley's near-catastrophic rush to glory, the battalion had settled into the grinding, watchful rhythm of counterinsurgency. We lost 2 more soldiers. A specialist from Alpha Company to an IED on a route we'd cleared a dozen times, and a young private from my own Bravo to a sniper's round during a dismounted patrol in a sector Ridley's company had declared permissive. That one tasted of ashes and unspoken blame. I'd stood at both graves at Bagram, the wind whipping the dust into my eyes, feeling the weight of every decision I'd made that had put them in that place. Ridley had been reassigned shortly after we redeployed. Not fired, not officially. The Army has 1,000 polite ways to say you failed upwards. He'd been given a staff job at Division G3, a paper-pushing purgatory for ambitious captains who'd shown poor judgment in the field. I'd heard he'd taken it as a personal affront, a political maneuver by the diversity hire and her mentor. I didn't care. His absence was a relief, like the cessation of a constant, grating noise. The threat he represented had been neutered, but the scar tissue of his doubt remained in the battalion's culture. A faint skepticism I still saw in the eyes of some of the older platoon sergeants. My phone buzzed on the empty desk, a text from an unknown number. Saw the orders, don't screw it up. Thorne. A real smile, the first of the day, touched my lips. Marcus Thorne had retired 6 months ago, exactly 1 month after our wheels touched down at Fort Carson. 22 years of service, ending not with a parade but with a handshake, a pension packet, and a quiet drive off-post in a used Ford pickup. He refused any sort of farewell ceremony. I ain't dead, ma'am, he'd grumbled when I'd suggested it. Just done. I'd found him later, polishing his boots one last time in the company supply room. We didn't say much. I thanked him. He nodded, looked around the cramped room smelling of mildew and CLP, and said, "You'll do all right, just remember the Valley. Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast." Then he'd walked out, and that was that. I looked at the text again. He'd kept his number. I hadn't expected that. The ceremony was a formality, a piece of theater prescribed by regulation. But the moments around it, those were the real thing. I had time before I needed to be in my dress blues. I grabbed my keys. Thorne lived in a small, neat brick house on the outskirts of Colorado Springs, 20 minutes from Post. The yard was trim, the driveway clear of oil stains. It looked like the house of a man who had nothing left to organize. I parked and walked to the door, feeling oddly out of place in my service uniform, the gold oak leaf of a major shining a little too brightly on my epaulette. He answered before I could knock. He was wearing jeans and a faded 1/8 infantry t-shirt, holding a coffee mug. He looked younger without the weight of the unit on his shoulders. "Sir," he said, the old habit kicking in before he caught himself. A faint grin. "Ma'am, come on in. Figured you'd be busy prepping your speech." "It's written," I said, stepping into a living room that was Spartan but comfortable. A leather recliner, a large TV, a bookshelf with a few military histories, and a surprising number of Western novels. "I wanted to see you before I stood in front of them." He nodded, gesturing to the couch. "Coffee?" "No, thank you." We sat in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable. He studied me, his eyes missing nothing. "You look tired." "I am tired." "Good, means you're thinking about it. The ones who aren't tired are the ones you gotta worry about." He took a sip from his mug. "Ridley's replacement any good?" "Captain Mendez, solid, quiet, listens to his NCOs." "See, improvement already." He set the mug down on a side table and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "You know what they're gonna be watching for." "I do." The first woman to command an infantry battalion in the 1/8, maybe in the whole damn division, hell of a thing. He said it not with fanfare, but with the flat tone of a man stating a meteorological fact. "They'll be waiting for you to be soft, or to be a hard-ass trying to prove you're not soft, or to make it all about that." "I know." "I know you know." He stood up and walked to a small wooden box on the bookshelf. He opened it, rummaged for a moment, and returned. He held out his hand. In his calloused palm lay his sergeant first-class rank pin, the 3 chevrons and rocker worn smooth and dark at the edges from years against uniform cloth. "For your desk," he said, his voice gruff. I took it. The metal was warm. It felt heavier than it was. "To remind you where you came from," he said, sitting back down. "And that the best commanders never forget the sound of dirt under boots, the weight of a ruck, the smell of a month in the same socks. You can't lead from this." He tapped the oak leaf on my shoulder. "If you forget what it's like to earn this." He pointed to the pin in my hand. I closed my fingers around it, the edges pressing into my palm. "I won't forget, Marcus." "I know," he repeated. Then he smiled, a real one, lines crinkling around his eyes. "Now get out of my house. You've got a battalion to take." The change of command ceremony is a ritual of pure army symbolism, a pageant of continuity. The battalion was formed up on the main parade field, companies in precise blocks, guidons snapping in the dry Colorado wind. Families sat in rows of folding chairs on the grass, sunglasses hiding their eyes. The air smelled of cut grass, clean wool, and a faint trace of tank exhaust. I stood at parade rest beside the outgoing commander, Lieutenant Colonel Haskins, a good man who was leaving for the War College. The reviewing party was a collection of senior officers and command sergeants major. And there, standing slightly apart, was Brigadier General David Chen. His single star looked both inevitable and newly polished. He caught my eye and gave the smallest of nods. It wasn't a smile. It was an affirmation. The band played, the chaplain prayed. Haskins gave a short, heartfelt speech about honor and the privilege of command. Then it was my turn. As I walked to the podium, my boots crunching on the gravel path, I let my gaze sweep across the formation. 700 soldiers, their faces a mosaic of expectation, skepticism, curiosity, and simple boredom with the ceremony. I saw my new company commanders. Captain Mendez, his back ramrod straight. Others who had once been lieutenants in my company, now with their own commands. I saw the senior NCOs, the sergeants major whose loyalty was to the institution, and who would judge me solely on my competence. Then I saw her. 3rd rank, 2nd file in Charlie Company's formation, Specialist Petrova. Her uniform was sharp, her posture perfect, but it was her face that held me. The 19-year-old private I'd met, wide-eyed and nervously adjusting her helmet, was gone. In her place was a 20-year-old woman with a steady, calm gaze. She looked back at me and there was no fanfare in her expression, just a quiet, resolved recognition. She had re-enlisted. She had chosen to stay in my battalion, in my infantry. The weight of that choice, of that trust, hit me with a force that steadied my breathing. I reached the podium. The microphone waited. I had a speech. I'd written pages about readiness, standards, and the legacy of the 1-8. I set the papers down on the podium and didn't look at them. Soldiers of the 1st Battalion, 8th Infantry Regiment, I began, my voice sounding clearer in the speakers than I felt inside. Families, distinguished guests. I paused, my eyes moving across the sea of green. A year ago, we were in a valley. It was hot. The dust there was fine, like powder, and it got everywhere, in your teeth, in the actions of your rifles. One company was on the high ground, one was in the valley floor. We moved methodically because the ground was treacherous and the enemy was patient. A ripple went through the formation. They remembered, they were there. We learned something there. Some of us learned that speed without security is just recklessness. Some of us learned that trust, once broken, is harder to rebuild than any outpost. And all of us learned that the mud on your boots doesn't care about your rank, your last name, or what you look like. It just weighs you down. The rucksack on your back doesn't care either. It's just heavy. I saw heads nodding, almost imperceptibly. The older sergeants were watching me, their arms crossed, listening. They told me when I first got to this battalion that women don't belong in the infantry. I said it plainly, without heat. They were wrong, but not for the reasons you might think. I picked up Thorne's rank pin from where I'd placed it on the podium. I held it up so it caught the sun. Belonging isn't given. It can't be granted by an order or a policy letter. It's built, rifle by rifle, trust by trust, in the dirt with your people, in the shared misery of a night patrol in the rain, in the silent understanding when you lock eyes across a security halt and no words are needed. It's forged in the moments when the only thing that matters is the soldier to your left and the soldier to your right and the job you have to do. I put the pin back down. My hand was steady. That is the only command we ever really earn, not from the army, but from you. I looked directly at the soldiers now, company by company. You don't follow a rank, you follow a person. You follow the person who remembers the sound of the dirt, who knows the weight of the ruck, who has eaten the same MRE as you, slept in the same dust, and who will make the call, the hard, terrible, necessary call, with your lives in her hands, and who will carry that weight every single day afterward. The field was utterly silent. No coughs, no shifting of feet. I have eaten that dust with you. I have carried that weight. I have made those calls, and I will continue to do so. My door will be open. My expectations will be clear. My loyalty to this battalion, to every single one of you, is absolute. It is the only thing I have to offer you in return for your service. That, and the promise that I will never ask you to do anything I have not done or would not do myself. I took a final breath, the high-altitude air crisp in my lungs. The Warhawk Battalion has a history of strength. Together, we will write its next chapter. We will be sharp, we will be ready, we will be relentless, and we will do it as one team. Hooah. For a split second, nothing. Then the sound erupted from 700 throats, a single, roaring wave that shook the air. HOOH. It wasn't just compliance, it was assent. After the ceremony, after the handshakes and the photos with General Chen, you made it about the work, Eve, always about the work. Perfect. After the families had drifted away and the companies had marched off, I stood alone on the empty field. The weight was still there. It would always be there. But it was a different kind of weight now. It was no longer the crushing pressure of proving I deserved to be here. It was the sober, specific gravity of responsibility. It was my weight to carry. I walked back to the battalion headquarters, the now familiar 2-story brick building. My office was no longer empty. The box was gone. My photo of my first platoon was on the desk. My field manuals were on the shelf. And in the center of the desk, positioned deliberately between the phone and the computer, I placed Marcus Thorne's worn Sergeant First Class pin. I sat down in the commander's chair. It creaked, a sound I would come to know well. There was a soft knock at the door. It was Specialist Petrova, still in her dress uniform, holding her beret. "Come in, Specialist," I said. She entered, stopped precisely 2 paces in front of my desk, and came to attention. "Ma'am, congratulations." At ease, Petrova. She relaxed, but only slightly. You re-enlisted. Yes, ma'am. Why? She met my gaze. Because I watched you, in the valley, after you never asked for anything, you just did the work. You cared about us. Not about being the first, just about being our commander. She paused, searching for the words. I want to lead soldiers like that someday. I looked at her, this young woman who had seen more and understood more than most people twice her age. She was the future of this battalion, of this army. And she was standing in my office because of choices I had made. You will, I said, and I believed it. Now get back to your company. We've got training to plan. A flicker of a smile touched her lips. Yes, ma'am. She executed a perfect about-face and left, closing the door softly behind her. I looked out the window at the fading afternoon light washing over the barracks, the motor pool, the mountains in the distance. The battalion was mine. The soldiers were mine. The responsibility was mine. I picked up the first folder from the inbox. It was the training schedule for next month's field exercise. I opened it, found a pen, and began to read. The work, as always, was waiting.